Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's Game of Thrones video on why it's all Stannis' fault. In this video, I take a look back at the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones and focus particularly on the character of Stannis, and I give my opinion on why I think he is the primary man responsible for all the tragedy that has befell Westeros during the course of the series. But before I get into that, just a few housekeeping notes on my Game of Thrones prediction videos and the status of Season 5. It looks like we'll get the trailer a bit later this year, as it was already out around this time last year, and that's most likely due to the showing of Game of Thrones in the IMAX cinemas that's happening in North America at the end of the month. And it's reported to be the first showing of the Season 5 trailer, so it's safe to assume it won't be released until then. Whether or not this means it's going to be released after it's finished showing at the IMAX or as soon as it hits the IMAX, I'm not sure. I'm sure if they tried to wait until the week-long IMAX run ends, it will probably be leaked by then, but we'll see. Also, they've announced a half-hour making of Season 5 special that will be aired in mid-February, so I'll hold off on my prediction videos until these 2 things are released, but we'll have a lot to say about them when they are, I'm sure. So, Stannis. It's funny, everyone has their favorites on who they think will win the Game of Thrones or sit on the Iron Throne. Some people like Jon Snow, others like Daenerys. However, there is a group of people really pulling for Stannis because he is, after all, technically supposed to be king anyway. In fact, I was at a party once and met this guy who was quite drunk, and he started talking to me. You know, I started talking Game of Thrones with him, and as soon as we did, he started cheering, "Woo, Stannis, yeah!" And he was going on like, "Stannis is the man!" And he proceeded to tell me over and over again how Stannis was going to win. I must admit I was a bit disappointed that he lost the Battle of Blackwater, and would love it if he eventually got the better of the Lannisters that robbed him of his rightful throne. However, as I look back on everything and how we got into the situation in the first place, I think that everything is Stannis' fault. Now let me be clear, I don't think Stannis is solely responsible for the giant clusterfuck that happened in Westeros. A lot of mistakes were made by a lot of people. However, I think Stannis' contribution is by far the worst. So let's examine the situation back where things really started going wrong, and that's with King Robert Baratheon's death. I know this wasn't the absolute beginning and that a lot of wheels had already been put in motion at this point. However, I think this is where things actively started going to shit. And we get the first fuck up that led to the ultimate disaster, that is the War of the Five Kings, and that was made by Ned Stark. Littlefinger was advising that Ned back Joffrey's claim to the throne and make peace with the Lannisters while working behind the scenes to control Joffrey and the crown. However, I think Littlefinger knew full well that this was not Ned Stark's style. While at the same time, Renly Baratheon suggested that Ned move quickly against the Lannisters before they had the chance to crown Joffrey by arresting Cersei and her children and placing Renly as the king of the Seven Kingdoms. But of course, Ned wasn't having that either, because technically Renly wasn't supposed to be the king, Stannis was. So even though Stannis wasn't personally responsible for the first fuck-up, it was made on his behalf, as Ned Stark was too honorable for his own damn good. However, I think the counter-argument that Renly makes here is a damn good one Ned should have listened to.
This isn't about the bloody line of succession. That didn't matter when you rebelled against the Mad King. It shouldn't matter now.
Bear this in mind, as it will come into play later on in this video. So after Ned refuses to help Renly and is then betrayed by Littlefinger and captured and then eventually executed, Renly flees King's Landing and gathers all the bannermen of the Stormlands and forms an alliance with the Reach, having all their support as well. So at this point, you have the entire Stormlands and the entire Reach backing Renly, with the Vale remaining neutral, Dorne having a tenuous alliance with the Lannisters, who they really hate, and where the North is an open rebellion against the king in the Western Lands, and the Iron Islands thinking they can seize this opportunity to take over the North. So basically, the Western Lands and King's Landing stand alone, with none of the other 7 kingdoms fighting for them, and with the Western Lands being in open warfare with the North, they're in no real position to defend King's Landing from the forces of the Stormlands and the Reach. So it's an easy victory for King Renly. That is until, who is it that comes along and fucks everything up? Yep, that's right, Stannis. So you may be thinking now, wait a second. Why are you blaming Stannis? Why not blame Renly? He was the one who proclaimed himself king when he had no real claim. However, I agree with what Renly said to Stannis here.
No one wants you for their king.
You never wanted any friends, brother. But a man without friends is a man without power.
Renly was the man of the people. He was the one who had true support. He was the populist leader that neither the Lannisters nor Stannis were. And for that reason alone, he would defeat them. Where Stannis would never hope to gain the support of the Reach. So what did Stannis himself do that was so bad? Well, he was a prideful egotist who refused to compromise. And I'm not even getting into the fact that he was being controlled by a religious fanatic. I'm just leaving that aside for the moment. But mainly what he says here.
Who'd steal the northern half of my kingdom. I've always served thieves according to their deserts, as you well know, Sir Davos. Joffrey, Renly, Robb Stark, they're all thieves. They'll bend the knee or I'll destroy them.
And like Ned Stark, he sucked at playing the Game of Thrones, and that was ultimately his biggest mistake. Not that he was a bad guy or he was too mean or selfish, because that's been proven over and over again in the Game of Thrones that negative qualities aren't necessarily a bad thing. And in fact, arguably, honorable qualities can be a very bad thing. But the problem here is not that Stannis was a dishonorable person, it's that he wasn't very smart. He wasn't very good at manipulating people, nor getting them to work towards his ultimate goals. He has seen in this his reaction to the 2 potential allies. Now, I can kind of understand his reaction to Renly, seeing how Renly took his bannerman and claimed himself king when he had no real right to. It'd be hard to come to a compromise. However, the way he just dismissed Robb Stark out of hand was a huge mistake. In fact, he didn't just dismiss him, he actively wanted him dead. I can understand how he would have bad feelings towards him for basically being a separatist trying to secede from the Iron Throne. However, Stannis isn't being smart here. He's being dumb and stubborn and, talking about his rights, and thus really is making the same mistake as Ned Stark, because rights really mean fuck all. It's all about how to play the game, like Renly said.
This isn't about the bloody line of succession. That didn't matter when you rebelled against the Mad King. It shouldn't matter now.
In Robert's rebellion, he had no real claim to the throne. What he did have is the allegiance of 3 other regions, as well as the Stormlands, which he controlled. That is ultimately what won him the crown. Renly was just following his example by gathering the Reach as an ally, but was Stannis? No, he was like, fuck the Reach, fuck the North, fuck everyone else, I'm the king, and that's it. Sorry, Mr. Stannis, but Westeros doesn't work that way. In fact, I would submit the reason why the Lannisters won, regardless of how temporary that win was because Tywin Lannister was much, much smarter than Stannis. He knew how to play the Game of Thrones, as illustrated in this scene where Littlefinger proposes an alliance between the Tyrells and the Lannisters.
House Tyrell rebelled against the Iron Throne, against my grandson.
They did. And perhaps that treason should be punished one day, after Stannis and Robb Stark are defeated.
You see, Tywin has no love for the Tyrells either, but he's smart enough to use them in order to win the war. Unlike Stannis, who was not smart enough to do the same thing for the Tyrells, or Renly, or Robb Stark, and instead is the stubborn, pig-headed man who allowed himself to be manipulated by a charlatan. So, Stannis kills Renly and thus alienates the Tyrells, who become his enemy, pushing them into the arms of the Lannisters, and thus is defeated when both houses form an alliance at the Battle of Blackwater, leaving the Lannisters able to focus on Robb Stark, who is then eventually defeated as well. However, imagine if Renly never died. In the show, at least, right before he died, he was prepared to make an alliance with Robb Stark, because unlike Stannis, Renly was not an idiot. Although in the books he was a bit more stubborn and pig-headed, but we'll overlook that for the time being and just focus on the show. As Renly insisted that Robb Stark plead fealty to Renly, and he would let him call himself King of the North, but effectively very little would change. I do believe Robb would have taken this deal, because unlike Stannis, he's no idiot and would know it would be his best chance of winning, and thus Renly would have not only the Stormlands and the Reach on his side, but the North as well. Think about this. In the show, Stannis very nearly conquered King's Landing and became king. He was only narrowly defeated at the last second because the joint Lannister and Tyrell forces saved the city. Imagine now that if it was Renly, not only would he have the added help of the Tyrells, that means the Lannister would have no one to come to their aid. And on top of that, Renly and Robb Stark would have coordinated their attacks, where Robb Stark would strike hard at the Lannisters at the same time Renly attacked King's Landing, keeping them too occupied to come to King's Landing's aid. It's over. That's it. The Lannisters wouldn't stand a chance. They would have been easily defeated. Renly would be king. Robb Stark would be effectively the same as his father was, but instead would have the title King of the North instead of Warden of the North. And with an alliance with Renly, they could easily stop the Ironborn from attacking the North, and thus there would be peace in Westeros. But none of that happened. Instead, you had a war that dragged on and on and on, and is threatening to reignite once again. A war that decimated Westeros and left many homeless, many fatherless. And why? Because of Stannis. Had Stannis not existed, or was smart enough to join forces with Renly or Robb Stark, the Lannisters would have been fucked. In fact, if you really think about it, the Lannisters were lucky. They should be thanking Stannis for fucking everything up that allowed them to win. On the flip side, had Renly not existed and it was Stannis, he still would have lost. The Tyrells wouldn't have joined him. He was too prideful to make an alliance with Robb Stark, one Renly would have made, and thus the Lannisters still ultimately win, which is why it's not Renly's fault, but it's Stannis' fault, because ultimately the fact he is technically king means exactly jack shit. And as to why, I'll leave you with one last thought from Varys.
Power is a curious thing, my lord. Are you fond of riddles?
Why? Am I about to hear one?
3 great men sit in a room. A king, a priest, and a rich man. Between them stands a common sellsword. Each great man bids the sellsword kill the other 2. Who lives, who dies?
Depends on the sellsword.
Does it? He has neither crown, nor gold, nor favor with the gods.
He has a sword, the power of life and death.
But if it's swordsmen who rule, why do we pretend kings hold all the power? When Ned Stark lost his head, who was truly responsible? Joffrey, the executioner, or something else?
I've decided I don't like riddles.
Power resides where men believe it resides. It's a trick, a shadow on the wall.
And there we go. So, that's it for my video on why it's all Stannis' fault. Make sure you subscribe to keep up with my future Game of Thrones videos as Season 5 is coming closer. And thanks a lot for watching.